Hello! In this video, I will share with you the answering techniques for novel question. Even though I will be using Dear Mr. Kilmer throughout this video, this technique is applicable for all three novels for SPM question. My dear viewers, I would really appreciate it if you subscribe to my channel by clicking the subscribe button. And if you like the content of this video, please click the thumbs up button and please share this with your friends by clicking the share button. Sharing is caring, right? In this video, we will first look at the answer template, and then we will learn how to write the introduction, and then we will learn how to write the body, and finally we will learn how to write the conclusion for novel question. So, how do you write answer for novel questions? Well, you can answer however you like. However, the best way to answer novel question is to keep your answer organized in paragraphs. Why is it so? Because it makes marking easier for examiners. When you organize your answer in paragraph, it's easy for the examiners to find the content of your answer. And to keep your answer organized, you should follow the following answer template. Let's see. So a well-organized novel answers should have at least 4 paragraphs. I said at least 4 paragraphs, which means you can answer more. You can write more than 4 paragraphs, but at least your answer should have 4 paragraphs. So what are the 4 paragraphs for? The first one, paragraph 1 must be the introduction. And then you must have 2 paragraphs for the body. Basically, the body is where you write the content. And finally, the conclusion in paragraph 4. So how do we write a good introduction? Well, a good introduction should have 3 parts. What are they? Part 1 is mentioning the name of the novel as well as the author. So you should start your novel answer by writing the novel I have read is Dear Mr. Kilmer by Anne Schraff. Or if you answer Captain Nobody, then the novel I have read is Captain Nobody by Dean Pitchfork. And if you answer Sing to the Dawn, the novel I have read is Sing to the Dawn by Min Fang Ho. So what is the second part of an introduction? The second part of a good introduction is to give a short synopsis. So this novel is about a boy who blah blah blah. So you give a short synopsis. Synopsis should not be long. A good synopsis is 2 sentences or 3 at most. Don't write too long because this is not a synopsis behind a novel, right? It's just the reason that you write the synopsis is so that you can get 2 or 3 lines without any errors. Okay, so the last part is to repeat the question. Okay, by repeating the question, this is actually, it depends on the question. If the question asks you about character and characteristic, then you will repeat the question. If it asks about theme, then you will repeat about the theme. We will see later. So this third part actually is what we call thesis statement. Because by repeating the question, you are telling the examiner that this is your answer. This is what you will focus in your answer. Alright? Okay, so let's see. So here is an example. With close reference to the text, describe one problem faced by the main character. Give your opinion about the way the problem was solved. This is SPM 2018 question. So how do you write part 1? Well, part 1 is the novel I have studied is Dear Mr. Kilmer by Anne Schraff. And part 2, this novel is about a boy named Richard Knight who loves poetry but hates violence. He learned many life lessons after he exchanged letters with Mr. Joyce Kilmer. Okay, mind you, part 1 and part 2 can be memorized because no matter what the question is, part 1 and part 2 remain the same. You don't change part 1 and part 2. They always remain the same. So for introduction, the only part that changes is part 3. Let's have a look. The most important part of the introduction is part 3. Okay, part 3. So for part 3, what you need to do is you need to look for the focus of the question. If you have no idea what the focus of the question is, please go and check my video, part 2, SPM Novels part 2, where we analyze the question and you should know what the focus of the question is. Alright, so what is the focus of this question? Okay, the focus of this question is this, which is one problem faced by the main character. Only one character facing one problem. So how do you write part 3? Okay, for part 3, you write it like this. Okay, because it is one problem faced by the main character. So the problem faced by the main character is... So you don't stop there, of course. You need to choose one life-changing event. Again, if you have no idea what life-changing event is, go check SPM Novels Part 2. I have explained extensively about it. Okay, so you need to choose one life-changing event, a big event that where the main character has made a big decision. Okay, next, you need to basically you need to mention the name, be specific. Okay, you need to be specific. Who is the main character? Okay, because we are using Dear Mr. Kilmer, the main character is Richard Knight. So this is how it looks like. Part 3 will look like this. The problem faced by Richard Knight is he was afraid to share his poems with other people. So this is how part 3 looks like. So if we put all 3 parts into one paragraph, it will look like this. The novel I have studied is Dear Mr. Kilmer by Anne Shroff. This novel is about a boy, blah blah blah. And the problem faced by Richard Knight is he was afraid to share his poems with other people. So this is how an introduction looks like. A good and organized introduction looks like. Okay, why don't we try another question? This is SPM 2019. In the novel that you have read, choose one character that you dislike. With close reference to the text, give reasons why you dislike him or her. Okay, again, part 1 and part 2 are the same thing. These are memorized, something that you can memorize. So let's go on with this. We should go and look at part 3. Remember, for part 3, you need to look for the focus of the question. What is it? Right? Choose one character that you dislike. So one character that you dislike. So remember, you need to be specific and mention the name of the character. So let's see. Part 3, the character I dislike is Richard Knight. Okay, of course, this one is slightly different from the example I showed earlier, because this one, it asks one character that you dislike. So if you dislike a character, you must have a reason. You must have reasons why you don't like the character. So you need to give the reason in part 3. Well, of course, it's okay if you don't put it in part 3. But it is best if you mentioned it. So, the character I dislike is Richard Knight because he is selfish and stubborn. Remember, in SPM Novels Part 2, I did mention that even the main character is not a saint and you can dislike the main character. You can be angry at the main character. It's okay because the main character also have negative traits. They are not perfect. Okay, so the third part is the character I dislike is Richard Knight because he is selfish and stubborn. Okay, and when you put the three parts into paragraph, it will look like this. Okay, only the third part has changed. The first part and the second part, part 1 and part 2, do not change. You can in fact memorize them. Only the third part changes. Okay? So I hope you are okay with the introduction by now. Now we are going to write the body. I hope you have understood the introduction, how to write the introduction, because we are now going to learn how to write the body. Well, the body is a tricky part to answer because it determines how good is your response. Because if your body is not good, the body of your essay, of your answer, not your body, okay? If the body of your essay, of your answer is not good, then your marks may be low, right? So you need to, really nail this part. This part is very important. So let's see. It is where you answer about the details for focus of the question, the effects for focus of the question, and finally, your opinion. Alright? Please refer to the previous video, SPM Novels Part 2, for more explanation about these. Yes, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the terms I use in this video can only be understood if you have watched video part 2, and if you have not watched, please go back and check out my SPM Novels part 2, and don't forget to like the video. I said earlier that the body is a tricky part to write because depending on the type of question asked, there are two ways of writing the body. Basically, there are two ways to approach the answer. How? If the question asks to describe only one event, like the first example earlier, you should use strategy 1, which is to write separate paragraphs. However, for other types of question, if the question does not ask only one event, then you can use second strategy, which is to write identical paragraphs. What are these jargons, you ask? Let's see. Don't worry, I will teach you. I will share with you step by step. Let's see, okay? So let's see strategy 1, separate paragraphs. Questions asking about one event was quite popular and have appeared many times in real SPM questions. You can check SPM 2018, 2016, 2013, 2012, and 2011. Okay, I don't think I have to go even further back, right? Okay, I don't need to. Okay, so using this strategy, the paragraphs are separated like this. Paragraph 1. When I mention paragraph 1, it does not mean the introduction, okay, because we are focusing on the body. So the first paragraph for the body should describe the event. And for paragraph 2, you need to give your opinion or describe the consequences. It all depends on the question, what the question asks you to write about. Okay, depending on what the question asks you, paragraph 2 may change. It's either you write your opinion or you write about the consequences. But basically, even the consequences require your opinion. This is how you write for each paragraph. So for paragraph 1, describing the event, there are two parts. The first one is to mention the answer or the event. That is actually what we call topic sentence. And part 2 is to describe the event in details. So let's look at paragraph 2. When you give your opinion or describing the consequence, the first part is to mention the answer. which is the opinion or consequence. Again, this is the topic sentence. And then you need to provide elaborations, and the last but not least, the third part is you need to relate to yourself or personal experience. This is very important because when you relate to yourself or when you provide personal experience, it shows that you are thinking. This is the hot part, higher order thinking skill part, or what you call in BMK part, right? Do not forget this. You need to you need to provide your personal experience, or you relate to yourself at least one or two sentences. Let's see an example for paragraph 1 where you describe the events. So again, we use the same question I have used earlier, right? SPM 2018. So let's see. This is what the question wants, right? So part 1, the problem faced by Richard Knight is he was afraid to share his poems with other people. Don't you think that this sentence is familiar? Well, this is the sentence that you used in part 3. Okay, so basically you just use it again, right? So the problem faced by Richard Knight is he was afraid to share his poems with other people. And let's see, for this question, there are two details that require elaboration. And what are they? The first one is one problem faced by the main character. So you need to talk about the problem the main character, which is Richard Knight, have faced. And the second part is how the problem was solved. And you see the way the problem, there is only one solution. So the question only wants you to answer one solution given by Richard to solve his problem. Okay. So for part 1, you give the topic sentence. You merely mention the event, one event. So for part 2, you need to elaborate. As I mentioned earlier, there are two parts of part 2, which is the problem faced and how it was solved. So you write it like this. Right? Richard wrote poetry, but he was afraid to share it with other people because his brother Gus and his classmates called poetry sissy stars. Well, is this enough? Obviously, no. This is not an elaboration, not enough elaboration. So you can elaborate this further if it is possible. Obviously, this is possible, to elaborate more. So write more. Write another 2 or 3 paragraphs to give more details. And about the solution, Richard solved this problem by telling Mr. Kilmer, a renowned poet, about his problem. Is this enough? No, you need to elaborate this further. So this is how paragraph 1 will look like when you put them in a paragraph. The problem faced by Richard Knight is he was afraid to share his poems with other people. Richard wrote poetry, but he was afraid to share it with other people. Blah, blah, blah. You see, I have added some elaborations, the one written in red. Okay, those are further elaborations. Can you write more? Yes, of course. More details is always better. Now let's see an example for paragraph 2. Okay, still the same question. Give your opinion about the way the problem was solved. So it asks your opinion about how the problem was solved. Earlier we mentioned that Richard was afraid to share his poem, and he solved it by confessing, by telling his idol, Mr. Kilmer, about his problem. So you need to give your opinion, only one opinion. But of course, you can give more than one opinion. It's not wrong, right? So let's see. Okay. Part 1, in my opinion, Richard did the right thing to get help from someone who understands him like Mr. Kilmer. And then in part 2, you need to elaborate. This is because by confessing to Mr. Kilmer, Richard received encouragement from his idol and finally became confident to do openly what he likes, which is writing poems. So you elaborate. Is this enough? Well, you can elaborate this further by adding the consequences. That would sound better for your answer. Now, for part 3, you need to relate to yourself. How to do that? Let's see. I also have been in Richard's situation. I was weak in mathematics and I asked my friend to help me with my homework. Now I'm doing better in math. As I said earlier, you can elaborate on this part, but you don't have to over elaborate. It's okay to have it. It's better to have it than not having it at all, but don't overwriting this part, okay? So for paragraph 2, when you put them in a paragraph, it will look like this. Right, this is part 1 and then this is part 2. Notice that I have added some consequences. The one I wrote in red. So as a result, Richard began to share his poems with his family, then with his teacher, Mrs. Hanson, who wanted him to share it in his class. At the end of this novel, Richard became confident and regularly published his poems in the Telik Weekly. Of course, you can write more, you can elaborate more, you can be more specific, about him sharing his poem with his family and what's the result, you can. But okay with this. And the last part, yeah, the one we have seen earlier. Earlier, we have seen strategy 1 for separate paragraphs where the question asks about one event. When the question asks everything else other than one event, okay, so they normally ask for a list of answers with suitable evidence. How? We will see. Okay, so each identical paragraph must have these 3 parts. Because remember a list of answers? So answer A, answer B, and answer C, if you give 3, or at least you give 2, A or B, then they must be identical. The way you answer is identical, not the answer. Obviously, your answer may be different, but the way you answer must be identical. Identical means the same. So let's see what are the 3 parts. The first part is to mention the answer. Okay, you mention the answer. Again, as I said earlier in strategy 1, the first part is always the topic sentence. And part 2, you need to describe the evidence. By evidence here, it means the plot. Which plot, describe the answer? Which plot support the answer? And finally, for part 3, you need to give your personal response, which is your opinion. Okay, let's see some examples. Here we will use the question we have seen earlier, which is SPM 2019. So part 1, you need to mention, I dislike Richard because he is selfish. Remember earlier when you write the introduction, you already mentioned that you dislike Richard because he is selfish and stubborn. So let's say selfish is the first point. So I dislike Richard because he is selfish. And then you need to elaborate. So this is shown in the novel during the hunting party when Richard purposely missed the buck when he was supposed to kill. Okay, he was supposed to kill. One day, Richard followed blah blah blah. Here, you need to elaborate this further by providing details of the event. Here, you need to be as detailed as possible by giving references as close to the text as possible. For part 3, you need to give your personal response, your opinion. So, I personally think Richard was selfish in this event. It is understandable that he hates violence, but he should at least kill the buck because it is his family tradition. Right, because it's family tradition, so you don't like it, you still do it. He also should consider past feelings. So this is why he was, you can consider Richard as selfish because he does what he wants. He doesn't consider anyone else's feelings. Okay, so this can be your opinion about the event. So this is how paragraph 1 will look like when you put them in a paragraph. When you put all three parts in a paragraph. So the first part is like this. Of course, you need to include sequence connectors. You need to include connectors, what you call penanda wacana in BM, right? So first of all, this is the first point, right? So first of all, I dislike Richard because he is selfish. And then followed by the elaboration. Notice that I have added even further more elaborations in red. And finally, the third part, which is your personal response. So earlier, we talked about Richard being selfish. Now, in second paragraph, we will talk about Richard being stubborn. So let's see. So part 1, I also dislike Richard because he is stubborn. And then you need to give elaborations. We can see this in the novel during the Liberty Bonds incident when he declined his role as the doughboy. The event began when blah blah blah. You need to elaborate this further by providing details of the event as we have done in paragraph 1 earlier. Now let's look at part 3, which is your personal response. I personally think Richard was stubborn in this event. It is understandable that he wanted to defend and show support to his friend Hannah, but he should not decline his role. In fact, he should not talk back to Pa when he gave advice to Richard. Right? So, yes, you may want to defend your friend, you like your friend, you want to give support to your friend, but you should not be rude to your father, right? So Richard was too stubborn that he actually talked back to Pa. This is not something positive, right? So this is something that you can dislike Richard for doing it. When you put all three parts of paragraph 2 in a paragraph, it will look like this, right? Okay, again, like we did for paragraph 1, you need to put the sequence connectors, penanda wacana, remember? Right, so next, I also dislike Richard because he is stubborn. So for part 2, right, you see I have added more elaborations in red. And finally, for part 3, let's see. Okay, this is still in one paragraph. Of course, the screen is not enough to show all three parts in one paragraph, so I had to put it in a new page. Okay? Alright. Now that we have covered how to write the introduction as well as the body, it is finally the time to learn how to write a good conclusion. So, a good conclusion should have two parts. What are they? The first part is to repeat the thesis statement from the introduction. So in conclusion, yes, and then you repeat the thesis statement from the introduction. And for part 2, you need to include your opinion or your hope. Okay, harapan kamu, pendapat dan harapan kamu. So it will be in my opinion, and then you put your opinion. And then I hope, then you write about your hope. Now let's see an example of conclusion for strategy 1. Remember, strategy 1 is question SPM 2018. So let's see. In conclusion, Richard was afraid to share his poems, but he solved it by confessing to Mr. Kilmer, who encouraged him. Okay, remember this is the thesis statement from the introduction. And this last part is the answers, the topic sentence in the body. Okay, you need to mention both because this is what you wrote in paragraph 1. This is basically the answer. For part 2, you need to write your opinion, and your hope. So for your opinion, it will sound like this. In my opinion, Richard is admirable because he was determined to solve his problem by getting help from Mr. Kilmer. For your hope, it will sound like this. I hope I can be determined to solve problems I face in life just like Richard. So opinion, you talk about your opinion regarding the situation you have talked earlier in your answers. And then hope is about yourself. Will you be like Richard? Can you be like Richard? Well, of course, for this part 2, you can choose either to write only one of them or you can just choose to write both. It doesn't hurt to write more, right? So when you put both parts in a paragraph, it will look like this. Okay, part 1 and part 2. This is how a conclusion will look like. Just a short one. Okay, conclusion should be nice and sweet. Now let's look at another example for strategy 2. Remember we use SPM 2019 question. So let's look at part 1. In conclusion, the character I dislike is Richard Knight because he is selfish and stubborn. So you see, here the character I dislike is Richard Knight is the thesis statement from the introduction. And then you also add the answers. Okay, the topic sentence in the body. The topic sentences in the body. Remember for part 2, you need to write either your opinion or your hope, or you can choose to write both. So this is what it will look like. In my opinion, Richard should not be selfish and stubborn when he has to deal with other people. Remember, this question asks about negative thing, about negative trait of a character. So your opinion, when you give opinion, you need to give a positive opinion. Okay, so Richard should not be selfish and stubborn. So for your hope, okay, I hope I would treat other people better by not being selfish or stubborn like Richard. So because this question asks about negative trait, okay, negative trait, so you should not want to be like that. But if the question asks you about positive traits, then of course you want to be like Richard, like the one we've seen in strategy 1. So when you put both parts in a paragraph together in a paragraph, it will look like this. Okay, this is part 1 and this is part 2. So that is how you write the conclusion. When you write conclusion, remember you do not add new content points. You don't add new contents. You only talk about what you have talked earlier in the body of your answer. Now that I have shared how to write the introduction, the body, as well as the conclusion, I hope you can already write your own novel answer. But it's okay, it's totally okay if you still don't get it, because novel answer is not easy to write. What you can do is you can rewatch this video as you refer to my notes. Please click the link in the description below to download the notes for templates and sample answers I have shared in this video. And more importantly, do a lot of practices. Because remember, practice makes perfect. So what's next? There is only one more part of this video, which is sample novel answers for part 4. But I may take much longer time to finish this final part of the series because school have started, everyone is busy, you are busy, I am busy, everyone is busy. So stay tuned and wait for my video. Well, that's all folks. All the best for SPM. Stay tuned for my next and last video for this series. Bye.